Paltrocast.
Getting this started here, it's an honor and a pleasure to be speaking with you.
Ah,
Big fan
thank you,
of
man.
your output as an artist for decades, your work as a producer for decades. Obviously, the work you do with Blue Note, you make a difference in that respect as well. But
Thank you,
the
man.
first question I have is, what do I call you in terms of a job position? Do I just say musician, Don was?
Yeah, yeah. You could even say bass player. That's kind of how I think of myself.
Yeah, so that
Yeah,
is actually
yeah,
one of the first things I wanted to know. In
yeah.
watching the video content that you put out with the Pan-Detroit Ensemble, we see you with
Right.
the upright bass. We saw you with the upright bass in the Ryan Adams band, etc. What was your journey in going, hey, I'm not an electric regular four-string person, I'm an upright person for life?
Well, I started on the electric bass. I was just trying to emulate Paul McCartney, who seemed to really be getting over
Yeah.
with four strings. Yeah. And I played that for years. I took some upright lessons when I was in college in 1970 at University of Michigan, but I dropped out before it made a real impact. And then I lost the lessons. I was I started a band with Ringo Starr in the early 90s
Mm-hmm.
as Ringo, Ben Montench from Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers,
Yeah.
myself and a guitar player named Mark Goldenberg.
Mm-hmm.
And we were looking for a male lead singer, and we called Merle Haggard just for the hell of it, you know. And he said, "Yeah, come on up to the ranch." So we went up to Redding, California, and uh, we went in his studio. He had a great studio at his house, and he had Bob Moore's acoustic bass, which Bob Moore was like the session guy in Nashville, played on a thousand incredible country records, and somehow Merle had his bass in Northern California. And so he just handed me that thing. And I thought, oh God, I haven't played this, in 40 years. And thankfully the song was in D, so there were a lot of open strings.
Right.
I just played really simply, but I'll never forget it. I was standing there, playing in tune on an acoustic bass, looking at Merle Haggard with Ringo Starr right behind him. And it was like a dream. It was like dreaming that you're flying. And uh, I just thought I gotta buy one of these, and I was starting a record with Merle Haggard or with Chris Christopherson a couple of days later. So I went out and came back from Merle's place, bought an acoustic bass, and then I love the warmth of it. I love the fact that even if you can't really hear yourself, you can feel the note because it vibrates on your whole body and you become the note kind of. It's really wonderful to be connected with a resonant piece of wood like that. So I just fell in love with it, and I'm still terrible, but I'm
I
getting better.
wouldn't say you're terrible. I mean,
I would, man.
if we're comparing you against, say, Christian McBride or something like that,
Yeah,
well,
yeah,
yeah. But the key is you're doing it. You're going through the hassle of carrying an extra, 40 or 50 pounds with you on the road
yep,
to every gig.
yep.
Do you get to have the same bass tech that you would for a regular tour?
Uh, with Pan-Detroit Ensemble, I might just be carrying it in myself from the bus. We're starting from scratch. It's a really exciting experiment. I haven't done this in decades. Just starting a band from scratch. I mean, so really since 1980 was the last time I did it. And there's a sound I've been hearing in my head, and I've been chasing it up for decades. And I'm 72 now, so I thought, well, you better close in on this thing while you can. So I started getting together with guys in Detroit because I thought, if you're going to start a band, be who you are. Don't try to, you don't want to compete with Christian McBride. You don't want to compete with Ron Carter, but they can't be you either. They didn't grow up in Detroit in the 1960s and go see the MC5 and the Stooges play at the Grandy Ballroom. So incorporate that into your experience. The thing that makes you different from everyone else is your superpower. And so I tried to accentuate the difference. I thought, go back to Detroit, get in a room with a bunch of musicians who grew up the same way as you and start the musical conversation going. And when we got this particular group of people together just in a room to play last October, it was like, bam, everything clicked. There was 9 people and we were all on the same wavelength. And that just doesn't happen very often. You're lucky if you can find that a couple of times in your life, you know. So
Sure.
I thought, all right, this is it, man. We're going to do this and we're going to see it through and we're going to start from scratch. We're going to end up playing to half full rooms because nobody knows what this band is. No one's heard of this band before. Pan-Detroit Ensemble. What is that? But we're going to go out there and we're going to do it. And over a period of time, people are going to come to love this band. And I really believe in it. And I'm thrilled to go out there with a group of musicians that I know we can get some communication going amongst, and to not know where it's going. It's going to turn into something else. This first tour is like about 2.5 weeks, and we'll never be able to get back to this point again where we go in with beginner's mind, have no idea what's going to happen, but we're pushing the limits every time. I'm really looking forward to the shows. Once you figure it out, you go somewhere else, and it may be someplace better, but it will never have that kind of rawness and focus again.
Yeah. Now you called out when it comes to Detroit influences,
Yeah,
MC5 and the Stooges, and of course the
yeah,
Amboy Dukes came out of that scene.
sure did. Yeah,
Then Alice Cooper's happy to talk about how he's from Detroit, even though he's really from Arizona.
yeah,
And then Grand Funk and all that. Being a
yeah.
big David Lee Roth guy, the Bissonette brothers were both Detroit guys.
Yes,
So I
yes,
think
absolutely. Yeah,
the
yeah.
roots of Detroit are much wider than people realize. Did you have
Yep.
a certain number of years of your career where you just didn't talk about Detroit?
No, never. Always proud of it. And always proud to be from there, and certainly proud of the musical heritage because it's unlike any other city in history, really. First of all, the music that comes out of Detroit it has got a special quality to it. You can identify it pretty quickly, and it kind of matches the people of who live in the city, which is it's very unpretentious, very honest, very straightforward. No gloss, no sheen. It's just real, and you can go listen to me. John Lee Hooker is the epitome of Detroit music, about as raw as blues can get before it falls apart.
Yeah.
But so soulful and so powerful. It really gets under your skin. And you go through all the different styles of music that came to there, whether it's the R&B that came to Fortune Records and then Motown, which even though Motown records were pop records, if you listen to those, man, those are very raw, honest sounding records. You hear that room
Sure.
and you hear the people in the room, and you can tell that this is not made in New York, you know. But also the jazz thing, man. On Blue Note, I would say maybe 20% of the artists, going back over the history of the whole company, 20% of our roster came from Detroit. It's shocking how many great jazz musicians came out of Detroit. And you mentioned the rock and roll scene. I'd add Mitch Ryder to that
Oh yeah.
jambalaya as a guy who maybe really were the first rock and roll guys uh, to bring like legit R&B phrasing into the rock and the white rock and roll idiom. And he's not only an eloquent export of the Detroit sound, but one of the great rock and roll singers to come out of the 1960s altogether.
Yeah. So the before I ask a question about the next generation of the
Yeah,
Was Clan,
yeah.
the set list is looking like it's going to be, if I'm correct, a mix of things that you produced and jazz and improvisation.
Yeah, but it's also we got a couple of odd was not was things thrown in. I did a record with Herbie Hancock and Terrence Blanchard and some of these same guys, Dave McMurray, Luis Resto, in the '90s for Verve. It's called Orchestra Was, and so we're doing a song from that album, doing a song from a movie score. I worked on the movie Backbeat. Actually won a
Oh,
BAFTA award for
hey,
that one.
if I can rudely interrupt you, I've gotten
Yes.
into arguments about how great that soundtrack is because
Thank you.
Dave Grohl, Dave Perner,
Yeah,
Greg
yeah.
Dulli,
Wow.
Mike
Yeah.
Mills. And when I was at a corporate gig that Mike Mills did, I
Hmm.
shouted out, "The Backbeat soundtrack's great," and he looked at me very blankly. But did you know how great of a soundtrack that was while you were working on it?
There was magic. What happened was it was in that same period when I was doing stuff with Ringo in the 90s, and they offered me the things. The first thing I did was call him up and say, "Do you mind if this A, if this movie's made, or and B, if I work on it?" And he said, "I wasn't even in the band when that happened, so do whatever you want." He said, "But I'll give you a piece of advice as someone who saw the Beatles play in Hamburg." He said, "Don't try to make it sound like the Beatles albums, the early albums. They were raw. They were a punk band." He said, and they were amped up on speed, and it was a whole different thing. So he said, "Get that rawness." So it was, yes, it was an incredible band. It was Thurston Moore. Uh, Dave Grohl was playing drums. Dave Pirner sang the McCartney parts, and oh
It was
shoot,
Mike Mills and Greg
Mike Mills,
Dooley,
Greg
if I
Dooley, yeah,
remember.
from Afghan Wigs, yeah, and Henry Rollins did a vocal to cover for the one song that Stuart Sutcliffe sang. And when we got those guys in the studio, we cut the whole thing in about 2 days, and we knew it had incredible energy and magic to it. And they got together to do a couple of gigs when the movie came out, and it was powerful. It was a good group. We had a lot of fun.
And it got a weird random MTV Video Music Awards performance as
Yeah,
well in that cycle.
yeah, it was great. I won the BAFTA award for best original score, right? Because I wrote the score music to go along with it, and I didn't know what BAFTA was. So it's the British Oscars, and it's kind of a big deal, but I didn't know what it was, and so they even called this. They said you got to go to Scotland and accept this award. So I'm not going all the way to Scotland to get it. I said no, it's the BAFTA awards. You got to go, and they said you won. They even told me I'd won. I didn't go. And some guy got up, accepted the statue for me, and I've never seen it.
Well, the curiosity I had related to the Backbeat soundtrack otherwise is,
Yeah,
was that the gig that led to That Thing You Do, which my friend Mike Viola sang, who maybe didn't
yeah,
get the credit that he was supposed to get, but ultimately
yeah,
things turned out just fine for him and you under the
yeah,
Blue Note awning.
yeah. Yes, yes. Mike's a great guy, very talented guy, and it probably did lead to that. I never thought about that before, but it seems like they kind of go hand in hand. When we worked on it, it was we were going for a very authentic sound. We got like all 60s instruments and used 60s microphones. And after we cut the tracks, it got a little, a, the whole process got a little convoluted, and some other folks came in and decided that, wait, we could make a modern hit soundtrack out of this. And they messed with the tracks, and I ended up taking my name off the movie. Uh, but I might have been a little harsh. It's a cool little movie. It was cool hanging out. Tom, directed it, and he was in the studio. He's a good guy. Uh, Sent me a bottle of champagne for my 40th birthday, as I recall. Got no problem with him, but it got changed around, and I didn't feel it had the authenticity that it originally had. You can
Got
get a
it.
little precious about that stuff too. I'll tell you another thing. I did, what I produced. Oh man, You've Got a Friend in Me from Toy Story.
Yeah.
Okay, and Toy Story 1 was the first Pixar movie, right?
Yes.
I've forgotten the name of the guy who created it and directed it. I'll think of it. But anyway, the director, to me, we didn't know what Pixar was. We thought it was like a cartoon, right? So he was the cartoon guy. So we cut You've Got a Friend in Me as a duet with Lyle Lovett and Randy Newman. And Randy was scoring the movie, and he asked me to come in and produce that song. So I did, and they sang it kind of slow. And it was beautiful. Just there was all these pathos in Lyle's voice, and it took on more gravitas, slower. And the director kind of tiptoed up, and he said, "Excuse me, I don't mean to interfere." He said, "This is coming after a car chase in the movie, and it's going to feel twice as slow." And I was all precious about it. I said, "How dare you? Do you not hear the pathos in this?" And he just like kind of slunk back. And of course, when the movie was finished and you could drop the music in, it was way too slow, and we didn't have the technology back then to speed it up. So we had to go with it. It was a real mess, but the director was right, and I learned a really valuable lesson that day, which is when you're making music for movies, you serve the director. You're not there like to be an artiste. You're there to advance the story. And the
Hmm.
director is the storyteller, and you do what he says. You don't fight with the director, man. He knows how to fill his space up and tell the story. And of course, when we finally saw it, we realized what this guy had created. What a masterpiece. So I was humbled in that moment, but I never forgot it again when I had to work on movies.
Thankfully, the hits have kept coming. And the last thing I wanted to ask you about before I let you go, and thank you again for doing this,
Yeah, of
was
course, man.
there's a couple of kids that are doing fantastic in the music world from your family. And I didn't know when the wife and I went to see Thumpasaurus a couple of months ago in Canada.
Wow.
What? That's a was right there.
Oh
Now,
yeah, that's my son Henry. Yeah,
will
my
we
son.
ever see a full family tour? Because let's face it, if we put your fan base, the Thumpasaurus thing, Tony's thing, etc., you guys
Yep.
legitimately could be doing 2 to 3,000 people a night.
That well, I would love to do it. But also, my younger son Saul produced Beyonce's record. He produced two tracks on Renaissance and wrote two songs. So they're all doing it. My oldest son Tony, you mentioned, he was in the band Eve Six, and he's got his own group Dead Posey that's out making records now. And yeah, no, we get together and play, at the house every so often, and it doesn't sound like any of the four bands. It takes on a whole other identity. I would love nothing more than to go out and play with my kids. Perhaps you give me the incentive to do so. I appreciate
Well, it could be a co-headline deal with the Pan-Detroit Ensemble. So
that.
there you go. The
Good.
bottom line is this: I'm excited to see the show. I see it's at City Winery, it's at Count
Yep.
Basie. So us
Yep.
New Yorkers have a couple of opportunities there. But
Great. Yeah.
looking
Please
forward,
come and please say hi. Yeah.
thank you. Looking forward to that. Looking forward to what you put out through Blue Note, whatever it
Thank you,
is
man.
done. Looking forward to it.
I appreciate it, Darren. It's great to.
Paltrocast.